So what tools do we have to help make assessment work more efficiently? We can sort of divide these tools up into two different categories. One's called direct assessment and another's called indirect. And I can really help illustrate them by trying to look at an Olympic sprint here. How can we tell whether or not we did a good job training for this sprint? Well, the first way, of course, is with the very direct measurement shown in red here of how fast did we actually run. That's easy to measure, just requires a clock. But it's not the only way we can get feedback about how that race went. We can look at an announcer who says his strides were beautifully rhythmic. And we can even ask the racers themselves. Here's one racer that says, I had the best race of my life, whereas a different racer says, oh, my start was a bit off. And that gives us some real valuable feedback about what actually happened during the course of this race. So when we look at these two types of assessment, direct assessment and indirect assessment side by side, a lot of people say that they prefer direct assessments because they're more reliable. It's really true. If you want to figure out how fast somebody can run, the clock is the best measure of that. And in terms of a course, the types of tools we have that are direct are tests and assignments and presentations, essays, performances, research projects where students actually do things and you look at the products that they created, portfolios where they put it all in one place. Those are all very direct, measurable things, but they're not the only way we can assess. There are indirect assessments, and a lot of times I actually argue that these can be preferred because they provide a unique insight into things that you may not have gotten from just looking at the product. They tell us what was going on inside the head of the students. So student surveys, or we can look at some real metrics like retention rates or DFs and try and ask the question, why are the students that are failing, and use those to help us figure out what went wrong. Within direct assessment, we have a lot of products that people create, but it's very hard to sort of quantify with a single number. So people have developed this idea of rubrics, which are descriptive guides to helping you score things. And rubrics really need to have very specific and measurable criteria that we predetermine, that we tell our students about up front so they know what they're going to be measured on. We need to make it clear what about those criteria is being valued in the performance or product. And we need to really be very specific about the different levels of achievement. And of course, lastly is this alignment issue. We want to make sure that our rubrics align all the way to the specific assignments that we have and all the way up to our course level SLOs. The first level of specificity in a rubric is something called a holistic rubric. It gives you kind of an overall picture of a performance in a single number, and it spells out this criteria. But if you get a 3 in this example, you're an excellent researcher. Is it because you did all of these things really well, or because you did most of them really well? I don't know. I'm not getting enough feedback about how I can improve by just looking at this single number. So in order to create a fully descriptive rubric, we use something called an analytic or a criterion-based rubric, and this spells out a whole bunch of different criteria. In this case, individual criteria are on different rows. And then the columns tell us the different levels of performance and what the differences are. So in this case, I have a claim in my essay, and is my claim unclear or it suggests kind of a vague position? That's a developing level of performance versus if I take a very identifiable position that's clearly arguable, that's going to be skilled. And the difference between skilled and exceptional is that I was very, very purposeful in that position. So we know the specific adjectives that describe what makes something better in here. So as a student, I know very specifically what I need to change and accomplish. The process of designing rubrics is a lot like the process of designing SLOs. In fact, rubrics really are just little micro SLOs. The first thing you want to do is identify what you want your students to know and be able to do. Well, that's the SLO. And selecting the task that students perform, well, that's about our course design and aligning our learning opportunities with our SLOs. And now here we are designing the assessment. We're identifying the criteria, and the rubric is where we write out the very specific measurements that tell us whether or not we met our finish line. So rubrics are very much tied up and integrated into this whole process of assessment and alignment. So within online courses, we have a lot of great digital tools that are going to help us use rubrics much quicker and more efficiently. So within CSUN, we subscribe to a service called Turnitin, and of course that has some plagiarism checking and things like that, but one of the most powerful features is called GradeMark, where we can define rubrics and then use those rubrics to quickly and easily score individual student assignments. And that's going to help make our grading faster and more consistent.